Hello, thanks for joining me today for this presentation on the proper collection, labeling, and transport for clinic collected samples here at the OMAC Clinic of Confluence Health. The quality of the results the lab is able to get for our patients and our providers begins with the integrity of the specimens that we run our testing on. So we want to work with our medical assistant staff to make sure that the highest quality samples are being brought to the lab for testing. After this presentation, the medical assistant will be able to demonstrate proper swab selection and sample collection for all clinic-collected laboratory tests, demonstrate proper labeling and transport requirements for all clinic-collected laboratory tests, and understand the rejection criteria for clinic-collected samples. Any samples brought to the lab must be clearly labeled with two patient identifiers. Initials, nicknames, or the room number of the patient are not adequate. The best way to do this is with the EPIC labels that are generated during patient check-in. But please be careful when you put the label on that the name can still be read as well as the date of birth or MRN. All samples brought to the laboratory must be in a biohazard bag. Not only is this a safety requirement, it also will help keep our patients from being exposed to potentially infectious substances. When you enter the lab, you should see this basket. This is the best place to leave your samples. It's also a great idea to just make eye contact or make sure one of the lab staff sees that you're dropping something off as well. Urine's brought down to the laboratory for standard urinalysis testing, such as our UA, UA2, or urine culture tests, must be a clean catch. That means a midstream sample, and there are cleansing wipes in all of the bathrooms. It's important that these get to the lab promptly, as they can only be left at room temperature for less than 2 hours. Oftentimes, patients, especially for OB appointments, label their cups with initials only. It's very important that the medical assistants please label these cups before bringing them to the laboratory. The other urine tests we run often are for the CTGC or chlamydia gonorrhea tests. These must be a dirty catch as opposed to a clean catch. The best sample for this is a first morning void. These samples should not be shared, as a clean catch sample for urinalysis is not adequate for chlamydia gonorrhea testing, and vice versa. This sample is clearly labeled with the patient's name, MRN, and birth date. This is the EPIC label that's generated at patient check-in. These blue-topped Amy's transport media swabs are used for most general cultures in our clinic. This would be a wound culture, genital culture, fungal culture, or throat backup culture. Also, many other cultures would go on this swab. Call the lab if you're not sure. These red-topped transport media swabs are only appropriate for PCR testing. This would be for group B streps on your OB patients, or for MRSA pre-surgical screening tests only. If you want to test a patient for MRSA, but it is not for pre-surgical NARIS screening, it should be run on a standard culture swab and run for a full wound culture. Swabs for flu testing are special and come with the test kits. They are kept in the laboratory. They must be a nasopharyngeal sample, not just a NARIS. This means going back farther than you think. You want to go all the way through the sinus to the back of the throat. For these samples, please put the sample label on the actual swab, not on the wrapper or bag. These are properly labeled flu swabs with the label on the swab, not on the wrapper or the bag. The sample for our Group A strep screen, or RSS test, is a plain cotton swab as well as a blue culture swab. The cotton swab is used for the rapid test, and the blue culture swab is for any tests that are negative to be plated. This is important as this test only has about a 90% sensitivity, and we want to make sure to catch any positives that would fall through that 10%. Both swabs can be collected at the same time by holding both in your hand as you swab the back of the throat. But again, it is important for that cotton swab to have the label be on the actual swab and have the blue culture swab also labeled independently. As you can see in the picture on the right-hand side, The cotton swab being labeled independently helps us when we run the tests to make sure that we keep everything labeled properly. On the left-hand side, you can see the proper collection for an RSS test, a cotton swab and a blue top swab, both labeled separately. RSV testing is performed on the same swab as the flu kits, but it must be a separate sample. For example, if you wanted to run a flu and an RSV on the same child, we would need 2 separate swabs for those tests. RSV testing is only indicated on patients 5 years of age and under, and just like the flus, it also needs to be a nasopharyngeal sample. Samples for KOH wet mount testing must be brought to the lab promptly. If they are left in the patient room and given time to cool down, any living trichomonas in the sample could die and not be found by the laboratory staff. Please make sure that only a small amount of saline is being prepped into those tubes and that the swab itself is labeled. Those samples also need to be placed in the heat block, which is in the front of the laboratory, as you see here. And also it is great if you can let the laboratory staff know that you're dropping off a sample so that we can complete the testing promptly. These yellow top transport swabs are only for female cervical vaginal CTGC testing only. The kit comes with 2 swabs. One is for cleaning, the other is for the actual sample. Please make sure that only the sample swab is in the transport media and that it is clearly labeled when it is brought to the lab. Samples for skin KOH testing are usually skin scrapings onto glass slides. Your provider will probably put these in a slide case. If you don't have any in your room, please let us know and we'll give you some. They will then label the outside of the slide case, but as they get carried to the lab, please make sure to carry them carefully, as the skin could get sloughed off the slides. This covers most of the common samples that are collected in the clinic here in OMAC, but there are others that we encounter with a lot less frequency. The lab keeps these special swabs and transport media in the lab for when it's necessary, so we can make sure that everybody is collecting the correct sample. This would be testing for pertussis, body fluid, culturing, cell count, or crystal analysis, viral cultures, or any CTGC testing that would be from a non-vaginal source. The lab has all of these media. Just give us a call and we'll help you pick the right thing. Also, any other weird testing your provider might want, give us a call and we'd be happy to try to make sure we can get those tests run for you. After you've gone through all that hard work to collect a sample, the lab would hate to have to reject it. But one of the main reasons that we do have to reject samples is if there's no label on the specimen. If we see someone bring it in and there's not a label, we might have the time to come find you. But unfortunately, too often when a sample is left with no label, we have no way of re-identifying that sample. So it will be tossed. Another reason for rejection is if something has been sitting around for too long, so a wet mount or KOH that's been in a patient room for more than 1 hour, or a urine sample that's been left in a bathroom for more than 2 hours. We also have to reject testing if the wrong swab type is brought down for the test that's ordered. For example, a red top PCR swab for a culture test. And just to drive the point home, we will reject samples if they are not labeled. Thank you for taking the time to view this presentation. It's important to all of us at the clinic that we provide the best results for our patients and our providers. And this all begins with having the best samples possible to run our testing on. If you're ever not sure about if you have the right sample, give us a call. The lab would be happy to help.